Hello and welcome back to our series of tutorials on Tanzu Application Platform GUI and the foundation that it's built on, the Backstage open source project. In our previous talks, we discussed the core functionalities of Backstage and the core functionalities of the Tanzu Application Platform GUI, our graphical user interface. Today, I will talk to you in more detail about the software catalog and service discoverability and the object model of Backstage that is also used in our Tanzu Application Platform GUI. Let me start again by making an attempt to draw the Backstage logo. Please bear with me here. So in our Backstage core functionality, we have that main plugin that is called Software Catalog. And it is meant to catalog all the organization's software assets. It is meant to make all of the software assets discoverable and easy to find and easy to operate with by your application developers. We're talking about two basic scenarios here. The first one is, as a new developer, I want to learn about what my team and my organization owns in terms of microservices and applications. What are the dependencies, who owns these dependencies, and how can I start delivering value faster? The second use case that we usually refer to is, as an experienced developer, I know well what my organization and my team owns, but I may need to learn about some new microservices that are owned by other teams. Where do I find this information, and how do I get in touch with that team? All of these questions can be answered by the software catalog. The software catalog entities have specific kinds and specific types, which I will talk to in detail today. At the very bottom, at the very foundation of the object model that we'll talk about today, is an entity kind called component. A component is usually the lowest denominator of the software asset that your organization has. It might be a microservice or a lowercase application, something that is self-contained and has a very specific ownership structure and dependency structure. A component, I tend to think of a component as a library index card. It gives you a lot of information about a certain book, but it's not the book itself. It lives a life of its own and only refers to the asset that it is pointed to. The second most basic kind in the object model is called a resource. And as I box it, I would mention that a resource is basically anything that cannot be described as a component, something to complete the picture. Sometimes it is referred to some data services or some other assets that are not quite fit the description of a component. And the third one we'll mention here is called an API. That is another kind that describes all the API endpoints and API docs of a component. So I'll draw a connection here. Now, all of these lowest layer objects, object kinds, component, resource, and API are aggregated to form another kind that I'm going to bring to you that is called a system. So by this definition, a system is an aggregation of components, resources, and APIs that together form some logical boundary of a capital letter application. And I should also mention that Backstage is making that object model pretty flexible so that it fits most of the organization's needs and ways of documenting and listing their software assets. Now, there is another layer of aggregation here. Different systems can be aggregated further into another kind that is called a domain. And that should complete the picture. So domain will be a group of systems, and a system will be a combination of various components, resources, and APIs. Following that library index card analogy, we can think of a component as a reference, as a library card, library index card to a book. System could be talking about a section in the library where this book is located, and domain could be something like a building where that book is stored, a library building. Now, I want to take a step back here and again underline that we are talking about references to assets, not the assets themselves. Let me move forward and bring a couple other basic kinds in the object model to complete the picture. I mentioned in the beginning that ownership is also an important part of our object model and the software catalog. To reflect the ownership of each of these assets, I will bring to you users as individuals, individual contributors that are in their turn aggregated into groups, which can refer to teams or different squads depending on how it is organized in your organization. There is another item that I want to bring here. It is called the templates, something we talked about in our previous tutorial. A template is a kind that is operated by our app accelerator plugin. Accelerator. And sometimes we refer to them as accelerators. The last piece that I wanted to share with you today is called a location, which is more of a internal operator kind. A location is a specific entity in the software catalog that points to a certain Git location in the organization that stores all the definition files for all of these assets here. So a specific location in Git will have a list of directories and a list of YAML files that will have the definitions for each one of these components plus the connections between them. Here I should mention that there are several ways of registering all of these components here. The first one is manual, where a platform operator or a software developer, an application developer, can manually create all these YAML files, YAML definitions of these assets, and put them on a specific Git repository. Or it can be automated by using one of the many integrations that the Backstage project has. For example, users could be automatically picked up from Active Directory, making it easier for your platform operators to organize information. I also I started in the beginning that we have different kinds, and I use it with a capital K kinds of assets in the software catalog, and this has been a description of the basic kind model. But we also have another layer of flexibility that allows you to store and properly catalog all of your software assets. Each kind could be broken down into several types. For example, if we're talking about a component may be denoting, take a different color here, maybe denoting a microservice. It can be broken down, it can be described as a library or an ML model or anything else that is most suitable for the type of software assets that your organization has. Now, while this may be more interesting for cataloging all of your software assets, some of the different types can affect the functionality that you see. For example, in API, in a kind of API, if the type is equal to Open API, you will get a good interface with the Swagger. But if it is a different type, you will not see that functionality, and it will be different. Now, if we're talking about the object model of Backstage and how it is used in the Tanzu Application Platform GUI, I should say that as of today, Tanzu Application Platform GUI does not allow any changes and extensions to any of the kinds of the object model. So all of these basic kinds will be there untouched, so that it does not alter any of the basic functionality of Backstage. And as a rule of thumb, as a recommendation, it is not recommended to change the core object model of Backstage. However, that second layer of flexibility can give you enough room to catalog all of the complexities of your organization's software assets. This concludes our introduction to the Backstage object model and the different object kinds that are available in the software catalog of Backstage. We started with the most basic and the lower level kinds, a component, an API, and a resource. We showed how they are aggregated into systems and how systems in turn are aggregated into domains. We talked about templates that are used by our App Accelerator plugin. We also talked about users and groups that reflect the ownership of each of these assets. And we also talked about locations and how a user and an operator can register and maintain all of these assets. That concludes our introduction to the object model. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you soon.